Well, this morning we're going to be in 1 Peter. 1 Peter, so please grab your Bible and open to 1 Peter. I've been teaching through this epistle in student ministries to our students, and I've been loving the section that we're in. It starts in chapter 2, verse 11, and it goes all the way to chapter 3, verse 12. So it's a big chunk, big section in the epistle, and it's where Peter gives 6 specific instructions how to live a life that's marked with holiness and humility, okay, a life that's marked with holiness and humility in a world that is full of hostility and hatred, specifically toward Christians. So that's that section right in the middle of Peter's letter. So if you're already there, I just want to show you those 6 specific instructions so that you get the big picture of this letter. The first instruction is found in chapter 2, verse 11. And here's the command there. Beloved, as aliens and strangers, I urge you to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage war against the soul. So Peter starts with this command, the first command of urging everybody, all Christians, to abstain from fleshly lusts which wage against the soul. Look at the second instruction in chapter 2, verse 13. He kind of narrows it down. He goes from everybody, all Christians, to citizens. Chapter 2, verse 13. Here's the next command. Submit yourselves to every human institution for the Lord's sake, whether to a king as the one in authority, or to governors as sent by him, sent by the king who is in authority. The third instruction is in chapter 2, verse 18. He addresses another group of people. Servants, be submissive. Second time he's using that command of submission. Be submissive to your masters. Talking about earthly masters. With all respect. Not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are, my Bible translates this word, unreasonable. Unreasonable. And I love this word because it's where we get that word scoliosis. If you've seen someone kind of walking with a back that looks like an S, that's scoliosis. It's a spine problem. So Peter's commanding the servants to be submissive to their earthly masters, not only to those who are good and gentle, but also to those who are scoliosis. Unreasonable, crooked, and perverse is the picture. You submit to them also. The fourth instruction is in chapter 3, starting in verse 1. Look at it. Another people group Peter is addressing here. In the same way that I've been telling others to be submissive, in the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands. And we'll look at that further in a little bit. Fifth instruction in chapter 3, verse 7. Another people group. You husbands, in the same way. In the same way that your wife has a God-given responsibility and role in your marriage, you too have a God-given responsibility and role in your marriage. Here it is. Here's the command. Live with your wives, literally, according to knowledge, or dwell or cohabit with your wife according to knowledge, in an understanding way. And the last instruction in this big chunk, in this big section, is in chapter 3, verse 8. He kind of pulls everything back together. Now to all of you, he says again. So he starts with, to all of you, abstain from fleshly lusts, and then he targets different groups. And now in the 6th instruction, he goes back to all of you. Chapter 3, verse 8. To sum up, all of you be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. So that's the section that I'm in with our students, and I'm not done yet with the 6 instructions. And I was thinking about, as I was preparing for this morning, for this Sunday, I just asked myself, okay, which of the 3 I really need to preach? And I said, well, which of the 6 do I really need to preach to myself again? And I was looking at the list, okay, abstaining from fleshly lusts, which wage war against my soul. I can do that. Submit myself to every human institution. Perhaps I can hear that again. The third one, be submissive to your masters. Well, my master is very, very good and gentle. I don't have a scoliosis master, earthly master. So I was like, The sixth one, be harmonious, sympathetic, brotherly, kind-hearted, and humble in spirit. I'm not there yet, so I'll save that for the students. And then I was thinking, okay, it seems like it would be most beneficial for me and also for the church if I were to preach chapter 3, verse 7 about the husband's role in marriage. But then I was saying, well, I got to get the ladies in there too. So this morning we're going to focus on those two instructions, okay, for the wives and for the husbands. And as you notice, it's specifically for the wives and the husbands. And if you are a wife and a husband here, this is written to you. Peter, in a sense, wrote this to you, meaning you have principles and applications that are meant for you. So please pay close attention. Now, if you're sitting there and you're single or unmarried, this might not be written to you, but it's written for you. So please don't tune out and say, oh, this has nothing to do with me. I can't apply these things. You're going to find out that the same principles for the wives and for the husbands do apply to you, because they're going to challenge and also encourage you in your character. So it has applications for all of us. So let's look at chapter 3. Follow as I read, starting in verse 1 all the way to verse 7. Peter writes, "In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Your adornment must not be merely external, braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry or putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you have become her children if you do what is right, without being frightened by any fear. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives with an understanding manner, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, and show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered." In these 7 verses, we're going to look at 2 instructions for cultivating a marriage that is pleasing to God. Pretty simple and clear. 2 instructions for cultivating a marriage that is precious to God, pleasing to God, glorifying to God. And if you notice already, the first one is for the wives, and the second one is for the husband. So here's the first instruction. Wives, follow your husband submissively. You want to be pleasing, you want to be precious in the sight of God. Wives, follow your husband submissively. How do you do this? There are 4 ways. Okay, we're going to look at these 6 verses for the wives, and we're going to break it up into 4. And then later on, the husbands only get 1 verse, but we're going to make sure we break that down and really bring that home. Here, for the wives, there are 4 ways to do this. Here's the first one. Understand God's calling. Understand God's calling. Look at verse 1. Peter says, "In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands." So Peter begins with that phrase, "in the same way." He's saying, in the same way that citizens are called to be submissive to the government, and in the same way that slaves are called to be submissive to their earthly masters, you wives, you also are called by God to be submissive to your own husbands. So that's That's where Peter is moving from and to. Now, the command be submissive literally means to line yourself up under. Okay, the picture here is to take yourself and to line yourself up under or behind an authority figure, and also to obey that authority figure. That's the essence of this command, be submissive. Same way it applied to the slaves, and also the same way it applied to the citizens. Now, before we look at what God is calling the wives here, what submission really is biblically and clearly, I think it's helpful for us to look at what it does not mean. Okay, what submission does not mean in the marriage context. Let me give you just several statements here that say that submission is not like this. Here's the first one. It doesn't mean that the wife is inferior to her husband in value and in dignity. It doesn't mean that. Just because you're called by God to be submissive, it doesn't mean that. Secondly, it doesn't mean that she must put her husband's will before the Lord's will. That's not what submission means in the marriage. Thirdly, it doesn't mean that she must follow her husband in his foolishness and sin, and we have a lot of those. Submission doesn't mean that. Fourthly, it doesn't mean that she can't have opinions that differ with her husband's opinions. Most of the time, the wife's opinions are a lot better than the husband's opinions. Just because you have a differing opinion doesn't mean that you're unsubmissive. Fifthly, it doesn't mean that she can't offer spiritual wisdom into her husband's life. Oh, I'm just a woman. I'm just a wife. That's the pastor's job. And he probably doesn't even need that. He's the spiritual leader, so I don't have any spiritual insight that would help him. That's not what that means. Here's what submission means in marriage. Okay, and I included it up here on the screen because I want you to really think about this definition of submission. Okay, submission is God's calling of a wife. And if you're only going to come away with kind of a skeletal, smaller definition of submission, I underlined the two most important words in my definition. Submission is God's calling of a wife to, number one, honor. Okay? Honor her husband's leadership. And secondly, to help carry it through according to her gifts. You can say according to her strengths and gifting. That's really what submission is all about. It's to honor your husband's leadership and to help carry that leadership through. Simple, but it's difficult, I'm sure. That's God's calling. That's what you need to understand, ladies. And when you are under God's calling, when you are trusting the Lord in that calling, and when you are practicing that calling by God's grace and by His mercy, there is blessing and protection in that position. You get to honor a leader, and you get to help carry it through according to how God has made you. So understand God's calling. Secondly, treasure godly behavior. Treasure godly behavior. Next statement in verse 1. So that even if any of them are disobedient to the word. Stop right there. The title here that Peter is using, disobedient to the word, is used several times in the New Testament, and it usually, almost always, refers to unbelievers, okay, unsaved people. So Peter is instructing the wives here to be submissive not only to Christian husbands who love and obey God, but also to unbelieving husbands who don't love and don't obey God, who have the character, who have the reputation of those who are disobedient to the word. Even to those men, to those husbands. Now, you may ask, why is that important? That's a good question. Look at the rest of the verse. So that they may be what? One. You know this word. This is talking about winning the unbelieving husband to Christ. to win the unbelieving husband to Christ. Ladies, if this is you, if you're married to an unbelieving husband, you know that his salvation is both your long-time greatest prayer and hope. You know that. We know that. And Peter's giving you hope here that he can be won to Christ. Okay, that's the encouraging part here, that he can be won to Christ. And you may ask, how? How does that happen? Here's how. Look at the rest of the verse. Here's how. Without a word, by the behavior of their wives. That's how you win an unsaved husband. Without a word, by the behavior of their wives. First of all, this doesn't mean that the wife can't share the gospel through her words, that she can't use any word. Doesn't mean that. That's not what Peter's saying here. What Peter's saying here is that when it comes to spiritual influence in the home, okay, particularly spiritual influence in your marriage, actions always speak louder than your words. Okay, think about that. Your spiritual influence, okay, the impact of your spiritual character is louder, you can say, greater, you can say, than the words that you can say. It's all about your behavior, your godly behavior. Now, what kind of behavior has a saving influence? Look at verse 2. Peter gives us the answer. As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. Now, let me give you a little bit more accurate translation of verse 2. Okay, it goes this way, literally. As they, okay, referring to the husbands, observe your, referring to the wives, pure behavior in the fear of God, okay? Pure behavior in the fear of God. The first word, chaste, or pure in other translations, is how the wife relates to her husband, okay? In purity, in chastity. The second word, respect, or the better translation is fear, is how the wife relates to God. So if you put those two things together, they go together. They go hand in hand. The reason why you can have a godly behavior, pure and chaste, toward your husband is because you have this fear of the Lord. That's why. If you fear the Lord, you will have a pure character. If you fear the Lord first, you will have a godly behavior. So the way it's translated in most translations, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, it makes it sound like the chaste and respectful are two behaviors toward the husband. No, the chaste is in relation to the husband because you have the fear of the Lord. That's the motivation for you to be pure and godly in your behavior. They go hand in hand. So ladies, don't believe the lie that your greatest impact is outside of the home. It doesn't mean that you can't have any impact outside of the home, but don't believe that lie that you got to get out there so that you can have the greatest impact that you can have. No, your greatest impact, as Peter is pointing out here, is in the home. That's your greatest impact. It's in the home. Your godly behavior, listen to this, ladies, your godly behavior can be the very instrument that God uses to save an unbelieving husband. Talk about spiritual impact. All from what? A godly behavior. Sure, go out there and have an impact, but it's not going to be like this. Because this is a miraculous spiritual impact that only God can do to an unbelieving husband through a godly wife. That's amazing. That's amazing. Unbelievers should look at you and say, man, what an impact. I can't have that impact. Peter's saying that is a grace from the Lord. So you treasure godly behavior. Number 3, beautify. I don't know if that's a word. I came up with that word. Beautify the inner life. Okay, it didn't have the red squiggly lines under it, so I thought, hey, it can work. I do like that word, as you will see. Beautify the inner life. Verse 3. Your adornment must not be merely external. Things like literally hair braiding, gold wearing, and dress putting. Literally how it should read. The word adornment here is where we get our word cosmetics. Okay, don't walk out just because we're going to talk about cosmetics, but that's not sinful, but that's the same word, okay? Adornment, cosmetics. Literally, it means to decorate or accessorize is the word. To decorate or accessorize. I call it, like I said, to beautify the outside. Our older saints may call it back in their days, or maybe even now, to paint the old barn. To accessorize, to beautify, to decorate. Now, our younger generation calls it ritzy, or a new word that I just learned a couple weeks ago because a young lady came up to me and made this comment, and I want to make sure I pronounce it right, bougie. I've never heard that word before, and I looked it up, I'm like, okay, it's like cosmetics, to accessorize, to beautify, to decorate. Ritzy. Now, Peter's not saying that you forget the outside, okay? He's not saying forget the outside. What he's saying here is that your primary focus, okay, your primary number one focus is the inside. Is the inside. And he explains it further. Look at verse 4. But let it be the hidden person of the heart. It says, not merely the external things, like those three things that he mentioned. Don't accessorize, don't decorate, don't use cosmetics primarily on the outside, but primarily on the inside. That's what you beautify. You beautify your inner life. This is referring to your character, your inner life. That's what you focus on. And notice how you beautify it. Here's how you beautify it, second half of verse 4. With the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit. Every time I hear this phrase, gentle and quiet spirit, it reminds me of when I was in seminary about 12 years ago. My wife and I didn't have vacations in our budget. I was full-time seminary, full-time working. We had, I think, one child then. Vacations weren't in our budget, but a generous couple in our church offered their cabin to us to vacation in. So we said, hey, we were celebrating, I think, our second year wedding anniversary. So we said, that'd be great. Thank you. So we went up there. It was a cabin up in just outside of Asheville, North Carolina, in the Appalachian Mountains. You go outside and you see the Appalachian Trail. I mean, that's where it was situated. And we get there, and we notice that they named their cabin Tranquility. That was the name of the cabin, Tranquility. That's why a lot of people in the church wanted to go there, because of its reputation. And indeed it was. It was very peaceful. It was very calm. Leslie and I left very refreshed, very energized. I'm ready to go back to the next school year of seminary, ready to go back to church and serve. That's how we felt, because it was a tranquil, peaceful, calm place. It made us want to go back again. Beloved, that's the picture here. When you think about gentle and quiet spirit, it doesn't make you a soft-spoken, quiet woman. Okay, that's not what it means. A gentle and quiet spirit makes you a tranquil woman. Okay, if you want to put those two words together, gentle and quiet, just put them together and call it tranquil. It makes you a tranquil woman. Because why? Because why are you tranquil? Because you're entrusting your husband, specifically his spiritual condition, if he's not saved, you're entrusting that to the Lord, and also you're entrusting your home life, including your kids, to the Lord. Because you entrust those things to the Lord, you can become a tranquil woman. Which is also the opposite of the contentious woman in Proverbs, right? Solomon describes the contentious woman in Proverbs 3 times, and pretty much, if you want to paraphrase his counsel, he says, hey, that's the woman that you don't go vacation with. It's better to live in the corner of your roof than to be with a contentious woman. You need a vacation from that woman, not with that woman. So if there's a clear antonym for tranquil, it would be contentious, or a woman who nags. who is contentious. Because why? Because she does not trust the Lord. That's really the problem. Now, why should you beautify your inner life? Look at the end of verse 4. Verse 4. Because a beautiful inner life, Peter says, is precious. The word there is expensive. A beautiful inner life is precious, very valuable, very expensive in the sight of God. Doesn't matter what the world calls precious. Doesn't matter what the world calls beautiful. That's not your job, ladies. Your job is to beautify the inner life. That is your primary goal. At the end of the day, that's all that matters, to have a beautiful inner life, because that is what is going to make you precious in God's sight. Here's the fourth way of following your husband's leadership submissively. Number 4, follow past examples. Follow past examples. And we see this in verses 5 and 6. Starting in verse 5. For in this way, in former times, talking about the Old Testament times, the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves by being submissive to their own husbands. They beautified themselves by being submissive to their own husbands. Now, how were these Old Testament women became this? Okay, submissive to their own husbands. I want you guys to focus on one word in this verse, and that is that word hope. Okay? They were able to be submissive. They were able to obey their husbands because they hoped in God. That is the key word here. That is, I would say, the most important word in this verse, hope. And if you know, that's kind of a big word, kind of broad, general word, but I believe in the marriage, in the context of marriage, here's how I have come to define hope in God in the marriage context. Hope in God is to trust that your perfect God can mediate his care, okay, for you through an imperfect husband. You guys follow that? That's hope in God in the marriage context. It's to trust, it's for you to trust that a perfect God can mediate his care for you through an imperfect husband. If you see hope that way in your marriage, you're going to be like these Old Testament women. And one of those holy women who hoped in God was Sarah. Look at verse 6. Just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Now, just a quick comment. The title Lord here that Sarah is using for Abraham, it doesn't make Abraham equal to God. The word Lord was also used back then to show respect for authority figures, and that's what Sarah's doing here. She obeyed Abraham, and she respected him by even calling him Master or Lord. Now, ladies, you may be saying, well, okay, I've read this before. I really believe and think that Sarah had it easy. Sarah had it easy. She was married to Abraham, the father of faith. If my husband could get his acts together and be kind of like Abraham, it would be so much easier for me to be submissive. You might be thinking that, right? And just on a side note, before I get to my illustration, when we say, oh, if I had a perfect authority figure, whether it's government or earthly master or a husband, if I had a perfect authority figure, I wouldn't have a problem submitting. Well, let me just tell you this. You do. The Lord Jesus Christ is your master. Do you obey perfectly? We don't. It goes to say that it's not really about the authority figure that gives us a struggle. It's our own heart that wants to be independent. So here, if you're saying, well, Sarah had it easy. If my husband were an Abraham, it'd be easier for me to submit. Well, let me correct that thinking. Let me describe to you what kind of leadership, okay, that Sarah was called under to submit. And as I read these verses, or as I refer to these verses, put yourself in her shoes. First of all, Abraham claimed to have had visions from God instructing him to move into a strange land, uproot everything and move to a strange land. Sarah had to submit. Sarah had to respect. Secondly, Abraham surrendered the best looking and the best grazing land to his cousin Lot when they was split apart. I mean, if you were the wife, if you were Sarah, you'd be like, what? We want the minivan, not the car, right? Why would you give that to your cousin? But she followed. Thirdly, Abraham convinced Sarah to pretend to be his sister, not just one time, but how many? 2 times. Okay, to do what? To protect his own life. He was a coward in that season of his life, to protect his own life from Pharaoh and from Abimelech. You see, Abraham wasn't all that great. He was flawed, just like me, just like all the other husbands here. He was flawed through and through. But listen to this, ladies. Sarah was able to submit to him because she hoped in God. Back to our definition. Even though Abraham was flawed through and through, even though the men in this room are flawed through and through, you can hope in God. You can trust that a perfect God can mediate his care for you through an imperfect leader. That's what it's all about. And listen, ladies, if you obey Peter's instructions here, you not only become a follower of these holy women, but you yourself can actually become one of the holy women, worthy of emulation, worthy of example to our next generation. Look at the end of verse 6. And you have become her children, referring to Sarah, if you do what is right, in the context of what we've been talking about, without being fearful of anything, literally, without being fearful of anything that terrorizes. Just think about all of your sinful fears that terrorize you so you don't do the right things in your marriage. All those things. He's saying you put those things aside, you can become like Sarah, worthy of emulation, be an example just like the Old Testament holy women. If you continue to do what is right, without being fearful of anything that terrorizes. Ladies, here's the key in following your husband's leadership submissively. Here it is. Hope in God is your greatest friend, and sinful fear is your greatest enemy. Think about it. Sinful fear will tempt you to think, oh, I know God is perfect, but there's no way that he can mediate his care for me through an imperfect leader. That's sinful fear. Peter says, you put that aside, you keep doing what is right, and you will be precious in God's sight. Let's move on to the husbands. Here's the instruction for the husbands. Husbands, lead your wife knowledgeably. Knowledgeably. Lead your wife knowledgeably. How do you do this? There are 3 ways here in this one verse, in verse 7. The first one is for you to learn her differences. Okay? Husbands, men, learn your wife's differences. Look at verse 7. You husbands, in the same way, live with your wives in an understanding way, or live with your wives according to knowledge. And the command here is more than just to live with your wife like a roommate. It's to really lead your wife according to knowledge. It's to be with her, it's to be one with her as her leader. So I call it lead your wife according to knowledge. Now we're going to talk about. I'm going to give you another definition for leadership. But before we look at that, let me just read to you a few things that leadership does not mean in the marriage context. Okay. First, it doesn't mean that the husband is superior to his wife in value and dignity. Doesn't mean that just because he gets to lead. Secondly, it doesn't mean that he doesn't have any weaknesses. Okay? It doesn't mean that he doesn't have any limitations. And it doesn't mean that he doesn't have any sin or flaws. Thirdly, it doesn't mean that he doesn't need any advice or any assistance from his wife, whether that's physical or spiritual. Doesn't mean that. Rick read it earlier, right? Why was Eve made? Because Adam needed a helper. And guess who else is called a helper in the New Testament? The Holy Spirit. Fourthly, it doesn't mean that he can lead his wife into foolishness or sin. Doesn't mean that. That's where you draw the line. And fifthly, it doesn't mean that he can demand obedience from his family. I'm the leader, you just obey what I say. Doesn't mean that. Here's what leadership means in marriage. And again, if you want to walk away with just two words, with the wife, it's honor and help. Okay, that's what makes a submissive wife. Here, for leaders, it's responsibility and accountability. Leadership is God's calling of a husband to humbly take on the responsibility, okay? To take on, I would say, the extra responsibility of shepherding his wife and accountability with God. If you want to lead, okay, or if you are a leader right now, that's what it's all about. You're taking on the extra responsibility of shepherding your wife, and also you're taking on accountability, as we will see. Huge accountability with God. Now, one of those responsibilities of leadership is learning your wife. Learning your wife. When I was applying for a firefighting job back in Florida a while back, it was like 10, 15 years ago, because it was so competitive, I had to make sure that I learn everything about the department I was applying to. I wanted to make sure that I knew everything about the department. I mean, I researched everything about the department. I would print out a lot of things from the internet. I would go on my lunch break at my job, and I would just memorize the names of the chiefs, okay? How long they've been on the department. I knew how many fire trucks, not just the whole department had, but every station. And check this out, I even knew I even knew the average response time of each station to an emergency call. Because I wanted to make sure that when I get to that interview, I knew everything about the fire department, more than all of the candidates. And it did pay off. Now, why am I saying this? Well, I'm saying this because this proves that we men are very super capable of learning something, that we even become an expert of it. Right? We may say, I'm not so academic. I get that. That's fine. I don't like learning. Okay, that's fine. But you know what? You can learn. You can learn. And you can become an expert of something. It is sad that a lot of men pursue expertise in unimportant things. Not necessarily sinful things, but unimportant things like, I don't need to read my list. A lot of unimportant things you can learn and be an expert in, and not be a learner and not be an expert of your wife. That's tragic. It's sad that we're seeing more and more men who would rather spend time learning a new this and a new that than learning their wife. Everything looks exciting. Everything that's new is a thing to do, and that is tragic in a marriage, because your command here, men, is to learn one thing. Your command here, men, is to be an expert of one thing, and that is your own wife. Doesn't matter what you know about your hobby or this or your career or your job. What do you know about your wife? Are you a learner of your wife? And here's the primary thing that you need to know about your wife. She is different. Okay, she is different. Look at the middle of verse 7. As with someone weaker, since she is a woman. She's different. This doesn't mean that women are weaker than men when it comes to intellect, character, or morality. It doesn't mean that. This simply means that women are not men, okay? They're very different. They're not men. And, when I explain this clause, as with someone weaker, since she is a woman, I like to picture it this way, and I think this would be helpful if you picture it this way. Think of men and women side by side. Men have bigger, stronger, broader shoulders, and women don't, right? Not as much. Therefore, the men can carry heavier and greater weight or burdens than the women. Okay, that's how I picture this. Now women are women can carry as much burdens as men in two ways. Number one, it's physical. I mean, we don't need to get into that. I know that some of you ladies are a lot stronger than some of us men here, but the norm is that women are more capable of carrying physical burden. Not as capable as men. The other realm is spiritual. Okay, women can't carry as much spiritual burden as men. Okay, think about it. When it comes to spiritual leadership in the church, who leads? The men, pastors, elders. Why? Why not the women? Because in the context of the life of the church, there are burdens that God meant for the men to carry, not the women. Again, broader, stronger spiritual shoulders. When it comes to spiritual leadership in the home, who leads? The husband, not the wife. Why? Because there are burdens in the family that by God's design, by God's calling, are meant for the husband, not the wife. Women are vulnerable. That's why God blesses them with a husband who would be their provider and protector. Again, it doesn't mean that women are weaker intellectually or when it comes to their character or morality. It's just when it comes to physical things and when it comes, more importantly, in the context of 1 Peter, when it comes to marriage, leadership, the women are not made to carry that much burden. That's for the men. So Peter's saying, you live with your wife with that kind of expertise. You learn her knowing her differences. Mainly that she is not a man. She is not like you. I mean, can you imagine, right? I was thinking about this morning as I was going through my notes. Man, I can't imagine marrying someone who's just like me. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, that wouldn't last, right? To be married to someone who's just like you, no compliment, no differences. One author describes it this way. He said this: the husband's tendency may be to act like a bull in a china shop, for those of you who own china, handling situations in a masculine manner as he would with his male friends or colleagues. Instead, he is to treat his wife as a fine piece of china, tenderly, carefully, and with great gentleness. That's Peter's point. So, men, learn her differences. Secondly, honor her similarities. Honor her similarities. Peter gives another command here in this verse. He says, and show her honor. And show her honor. Some Bible translations say respect, but I don't think it captures the bigger word of honor that Peter is getting at here. Men, here's what honoring your wife looks like. I was asking myself this, okay, what does this look like in my heart? And what does it look like through my words and actions? Because honor starts in the heart, and it should show, right? So I came up with 4 ways of honoring my wife, okay? Here's the first way. I need to trust that God didn't make a mistake when he gave me the wife that I have. Again, starts in the heart. I need to believe, I need to trust that God did not make a mistake by giving me the wife that I have. Secondly, still in the heart level, I need to thank God for giving me the wife that I have. I need to be thankful. I need to be the most thankful husband because he gave me the wife that I have. So that starts in the heart. You honor your wife in your heart, and then now it starts to show. Here's the third way. I need to confess and seek forgiveness of how I have not honored my wife. Hey, that comment on the way home from church, yeah, that wasn't honoring. Please forgive me. Hey, the way I was talking to you in front of our kids last night. Hey, the way I threw you under the bus in small group discussion. All those ways that you have not been honoring your wife, that needs to come out by confessing and asking for forgiveness. Lastly, number 4, I need to find opportunities to be a blessing to my wife. If you want to be honoring to your wife, you need to be a blessing to your wife. You need to find opportunities to bless your wife. You do that, it starts in the heart, and a heart that's honoring a wife, and then it comes out. Peter says, that's how you obey this command. Now, husbands, why are you called to honor your wife? Look at verse 7 again. Because she's a fellow heir of the grace of life. What does this mean? It means that when it comes to sin, okay, yes, you are different. Broader shoulders, stronger shoulders for physical things, physical burdens and spiritual burdens. You're different in that way. But listen, husbands, when it comes to sin, you and your wife, you are peers. Okay? Peers, equal. When it comes to your need of God's grace, when the Lord saved you, you are peers. When it comes to the need of God's grace as you grow in your faith, you too are peers. That's how she is similar to you. You treat her not only as an undeserved wife, but also you treat her as your sweet sister in Christ. That's Peter's point. She is a sister in Christ. Yes, she may be different, but she is similar. A fellow heir of the grace of life. A peer in sin. A peer in God's grace. Third way for the husbands to lead their wives knowledgeably. Consider God's warning. Consider God's warning. And you'll notice that in the end of verse 6 for the wives, it was kind of there, right? Peter is instructing the wives, hey, make sure you are submissive to your leader, to your husband. And guess what? Hope is going to be your greatest friend, and sinful fear, or you can say fear of man, is going to be your greatest enemy. Now here in verse 7 for the husbands, Peter's using the same tactic here when it comes to the warning, but kind of in the opposite. Look at it. So that your prayers will not be hindered. Okay? Husbands are called by God to live with their wives according to knowledge and by showing them honor. Why is that? What's the purpose? So that your prayers will not be hindered. Peter's point is that, hey, husbands, if you mistreat the wife that God gave you, if you do not serve the wife that God gave you, you better fear God. For the ladies, be submissive, don't fear man. For the husbands, hey, lead your wife, fear God. Fear God, that's the warning. If you mistreat your wife, if you don't serve your wife, if you don't live with her according to knowledge, if you don't show her honor, God is not going to listen to your prayers, which is, for a Christian man, is the lifeline of his Christian faith. That's the warning. Your relationship with your wife has a direct correlation to your relationship with your God. One affects the other. Now, like I said in the beginning, our time is gone here. If you're a husband or a wife, the principles we looked at, it's very clear that those are the principles that you need to apply, that both you and I need to apply. And if we obey them, we will have marriages that is precious to God. Now, if you are unmarried or single, and I get asked these questions as a youth pastor about dating and relationships and all these things, let me just give you some questions. Okay, for the young, I'll start with the young ladies. So when it comes to being honoring and helpful, ask yourself these questions for the purpose of making yourself marriable, I call it. Okay, before you marry, you need to be marriable. Okay, so ladies, ask yourself these questions. Again, submission is what? Honor and help. Okay, honor and help. So listen to these questions. Do I honor the leaders that God placed me under, or gripe and complain about them? Young men, you see a young lady who does not honor leadership and she gripes and complains about leadership, not marriable. But she's beautiful. That's just cosmetics. Second question. Do I help others selflessly and sacrificially, or only when it's convenient and when it's reciprocated? Now, to the young men, when it comes to responsibility and accountability, again, leadership is those two things. You're taking on extra responsibility. And you are in a greater accountability with God. You're going to have to answer for how you lead a wife. Ask yourself these questions. Do I take on responsibilities that don't offer privileges? We're tempted to, take on and enjoy privileges without the responsibilities. That's not a leader. Next question, do I accept responsibility for my failure or do I blame shift? A good leader also takes on the responsibility for his failure. Third question, do I embrace hard responsibilities for the spiritual welfare of others? That's a leader who takes on hard and difficult responsibilities because he knows that God may use that for the spiritual welfare of other people. Last question. Do I view leadership soberly because I know that it comes with greater responsibility to God? If you're asking, I think I want to start dating, I think I want to get married, that's my first question. Are you ready for greater responsibility? And are you ready for greater accountability? Like I said in the beginning, church, I hope this was both challenging and also encouraging. Again, to be used by God for the spiritual welfare of an unbelieving family member. To be used by God as his instrument to lead a family. Most amazing thing, if you have experienced it. Let's close in prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this passage. I pray that you would use it in our lives. I pray that it was very timely for all of us. And I pray that we would be humble and submissive to the principles and to the commands that we just looked at. And I know that we are fallen, we're flawed through and through, we're weak, we're limited. This takes a lot of faith, not just a one-time faith when we get married, but a long-term faith when things get really hard. I pray that all of us, husbands and wives, would hope in you, that we would trust that you can mediate your care as a perfect God through imperfect people in our lives. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the gift of marriage for those who are not married. I pray that the character principles here would be just helpful and edifying for them, and that you would bless them. Thank you for our time this morning. In Jesus' name, amen.